Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm so happy that you could join me today, and I'm very excited about this episode because we're going to have part 2 of our interview that we started last week with Garrett Johnson. And Garrett has kind of an amazing story of his journey and his struggle with sexual purity and the issue of pornography. So, hey, Garrett, thanks for being back with me.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here again.
Well, last week you shared with us, Garrett, a little bit of your story, how you were exposed to pornography when you were 9 years old, and then how that issue kind of followed you through your adolescence and teenage years. And in the end, you struggled with porn for about 20 years. It followed you into your marriage, and you lived this kind of duplicitous lifestyle for 5 years, the first 5 years of your marriage. And then through a series of events, you came to the place where you knew you had to tell your wife the truth. And that's kind of where we ended last time. And you mentioned that you and your wife kind of began a recovery process, and slowly you were able to regain your wife's trust.
Correct.
That's awesome. And by the way, I might throw in one comment. You mentioned that you and your wife did not go to counseling. As you know, everybody's on a different journey. My wife and I went to counseling for over 6 years on our journey. But when we opened our can of worms, pornography was like just one worm in the can. My wife had been raped when she was 13. She had never dealt with that. She had a very promiscuous adolescence. She had a pregnancy and an abortion when she was 17. I found my dad's pornography when I was 10 years old. I was sexually abused by 2 older women during my adolescence. So we had all kinds of issues kind of packed down in our hearts and our souls that we had never, ever dealt with. And all this junk, of course, was profoundly affecting who we were as people and affecting our marriage, you know. So it took quite a while for us to work through that. So I might just say to the listeners out there, you know, you're going to have to figure it out as you go. But for most of us, there's going to be a little bit of an extended healing journey here as we come into the light and begin to tell the truth about ourselves and the way it affects our wife and our marriage. So we kind of figure that out. And I think a lot of us might actually need some help and guidance, and counseling could be very redemptive, probably for a lot of people.
I agree.
So Garrett, from there, you know, where would you bring us forward in your story? So you're getting pornography behind you. You're getting some victory now. And trust is being regained in your marriage. So how do you move toward this 30 and 30 and your coast to coast in chains?
Well, you just kind of talked about all those repressed emotions that you and your spouse had. And those repressed emotions are just the most uncomfortable things to live with. And me dealing with my repressed emotions with pornography, it made me want to speak out about it. And I had this deep desire, and I almost felt like it was like I couldn't walk away from this desire to bring it to light, to talk about it.
And I might be wrong, but I just suspect that's just kind of a calling that God placed on your heart and life to make your life a vessel to deal with this issue and bring some attention to the issue.
Yeah, I agree. And that was the whole goal. In me doing 30 and 30 in handcuffs, my sole purpose was to bring attention to it. And when I started the journey, I didn't tell anyone about my challenges with pornography. I did the 30 marathons in 30 days while wearing handcuffs, and it wasn't until day 27, marathon 27, that I actually decided to tell my story. And I wouldn't have done that if it weren't for my wife. My wife's the one who encouraged me. She said, hey, you're kind of being a hypocrite if you're telling people to talk about it, but then you're not willing to talk about your story.
Wow.
And so she kind of encouraged me, and that's when I started to really open up. I wasn't planning on doing that. My intention wasn't to do that, but when she encouraged me to do it, that's how it came out.
I see. But you kind of promoted the event. I mean, were you announcing to people, I'm going to do 30 marathons in 30 days to bring attention to the issue of pornography? So people knew what you were doing, but you just weren't talking about your personal struggle yet.
Right. I was approaching it as a preventative measure.
I see.
Trying to bring awareness to the problem, but I never talked about my problem.
And how long of a marathon did you run each day?
So I did 26.2 miles each day, a full marathon.
Holy cow, are you kidding me? You ran a full marathon every day for 30 days in a row.
Yeah, it was brutal.
That's remarkable. That's amazing.
Yeah, I don't consider myself an endurance athlete, but I do. So the reason why I chose these endurance events is because I do have a little bit of a background in endurance events, but I've never considered myself an endurance athlete. So I'm not good at them, but I do finish them. Does that make sense?
Right, I see. Well, that's kind of amazing. So 30 marathons in 30 days. So you're half human and half machine, maybe.
Half stupid, half sane.
There you go.
Yeah.
And of all things, you run these marathons in handcuffs. Literally,
Right.
I saw your website. You literally had handcuffs, your wrist cuffed together in front of you, running 26 miles every day. So why the handcuffs? What did the handcuffs mean? What did they represent?
For me, what it represents is that there's so many people walking through life right now with handcuffs on, metaphorically speaking, because of the addictive nature of pornography.
Wow.
And so I wanted it to be, so the 30 and 30 is because I was turning 30 this year. So it represented the years of my life with these chains on and
I
me
see.
breaking out of them.
Wow, that's awesome. I like that, the concept of the handcuffs, because it's a metaphor of captivity. It's a metaphor of bondage. It's a metaphor of being imprisoned or enslaved to something.
Right.
And in a very real way, we know that that's exactly what pornography does to people.
And an interesting aspect of the whole journey of 30 and 30 is that when I began on day one, the handcuffs irritated me really, really bad. And I could hardly tolerate finishing one marathon in handcuffs. But the interesting thing is that by marathon 5, they didn't bother me that much.
Wow.
I had become immune to it.
That's a very powerful metaphor of how maybe the human heart and soul becomes accustomed to something that's very unhealthy for it, but it just becomes our normal, and then we allow it to exist.
Exactly. I didn't expect to learn that, but it was something that I kept journals as I went, and that's one thing that I did notice, which was very relative to pornography.
Awesome. So the 30 in 30, what did you do then? Did along the way, were people holding signs? How did people know what you were doing? Or was there a crowd at the end every day to greet you? Did you speak to people? Or were they handing out literature as you were running? Or how did you kind of promote this?
So what I did was I used social media a lot to promote it. I did what's called a substitute Saturday. So technically I didn't run 30 marathons in 30 days by myself, because every Saturday I did what's called a substitute Saturday, where people would come and every mile that they did would go towards my marathon that day.
Well, that's cool because it involved other people.
Yep. So going back to what you said about how important therapy can be and reaching out for help, that's kind of what that represented. Was substitute Saturday was I can't do this by myself, and reaching out to others that care and they can walk some of my trial with me.
Awesome. That's cool. So you do the 30 in 30, and that was just not even a year ago. That was February of 2016. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're almost to the year mark, so I'm gonna have to bust out my handcuffs and do a marathon in remembrance of it.
Wow. So you do the 30 and 30, and then that's not enough. So then you get another crazy idea to ride your bike coast to coast. So how long after the 30 and 30 did you do the coast to coast in chains?
So I started on February 1st, did my 30 marathon, so that took me into March. And when I finished the 30 and 30, I was gonna, because I had quit my job to do this 30 and 30, and so I was looking for a job in March, and it just didn't feel right. Once again, I couldn't not do it. It's like I was being pushed towards doing something more. And I told my wife, I came up with this idea of coast to coast in chains, and the first words out of her mouth when I told her about this idea were, "You have to do it."
Wow. How's that for a supportive wife?
I am blessed. It's pretty inspiring to have such a supportive wife.
So you set this thing up. You're going to ride your bike from Yorktown, Virginia to San Francisco, California, literally ocean to ocean, coast to coast, 3,800 miles. It took you 56 days. You covered 9 states, and you drug 7 chains behind you. And again, I can only imagine the purpose of the chains was kind of the same purpose of the handcuffs in the 30 and 30 in handcuffs to represent the bondage, the captivity of pornography.
Exactly. The chains represented the heaviness of addiction and recovery, because recovery is definitely a heavy process as well.
Right. It's not necessarily easy. It takes commitment, and it takes work, and it takes time, and it is a journey, and it can be a fight for sure.
Right. And so what I did was, when I got to Yorktown, Virginia, I was there. I had one friend that I flew out because my whole goal, once again, was to get the conversation started. And so I flew my friend out with me and to do some video to get it recorded so we can make a video and start some more conversations. So other than that, once that first day was over, he flew home. And from there on out, I was riding my bike across the United States by myself.
Wow, the whole time you were by yourself. You didn't have a team of people with you, helping you, following you, nothing.
My wife and 2 kids were here in Utah. I didn't have one other single person, not a vehicle. I was literally my bike and me.
Wow, that's amazing. So did you stay in hotels, or would you literally camp out at night? I mean, I'm sure there must have been places along the way when you're crossing barren, long stretches of nothingness. So nighttime comes and you're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, what did you do?
Absolutely, that happened. It was an experience that I almost don't feel like it happened, because it almost feels like a big dream.
Wow.
It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, because being separated from my family, I stayed in 3 hotels during the 56 days.
Wow.
So the other 53 days I was camping.
So did you literally carry like a little tent with you? You'd put up a pup tent and...
I carried what's called a bivy, so it's even more minimalistic than a tent. It's basically a sleeping bag that's waterproof that you can zip all the way over your head, a little cocoon for you to sleep in.
Wow, that's amazing.
And
what time of year did you do it?
So I started 1 month after I finished the 30 and 30. I started on April 6th, 2016.
So it was most of April and most of May, 56 days.
Yep, I finished on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Along the way, what did you do? A car drives by you on the road, and here's this guy riding down the bike, dragging chains behind him. Would people ask you, dude, what are you doing? Who are you? Did you have opportunities to share and to speak to people?
So many opportunities. There was 2 conversation starters that I had. The main one was the chains dragging behind. The other one was I wore a bright red shirt that says "Porn Kills Love." And so those 2 conversation starters, when I would walk in the gas station, people would look at my shirt and be, "What does that mean? What does it mean, porn kills love?" So then I would get an opportunity to talk to them about it. people, to answer your question about the chains, people would turn around and flip a U and come back and be like, "Hey, you're dragging something." Like I didn't know. So there was lots of opportunity to have those discussions. One thing that's interesting is that the chains, the whole goal of them was to release the chains, being that trying to resemble a journey of addiction and recovery. And so as I rode across Kentucky, across Virginia, across Illinois, Missouri, the chains, by day 22, all of the chains had fallen off and released.
Wow. I guess so. Dragging them literally hundreds and thousands of miles wore them down.
And so yeah, exactly. And one of the interesting things is that the chains themselves, they wore down. There was wear and tear on them for sure. But the thing that actually broke them and released them was the carabiner. It was a weaker metal. And that's kind of, for me, and the way I look at it is that we're not going to get rid of pornography. It's just not going to happen anytime soon, until that science does catch up with the truth. But just like the chains, they didn't wear away, but the carabiner that attached them to me, it did wear away. And so that's kind of the resemblance there.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. Pornography might always be part of this culture of this world system until Jesus comes back and we all go to heaven. But in the meantime, it doesn't mean they need to be dragging on my life anymore. So praise be to God. Let me ask you a couple questions. If you had to pick one outstanding event during your coast-to-coast ride in chains, 56 days, one story, one situation, is there an outstanding story from your bike ride that you could share with us?
Absolutely. For me, the most outstanding moment of the entire journey was, and I'm getting a big smile on my face right now because it was just a huge moment of bliss, was when I finally met my wife in San Francisco, and we rode the last 2 miles together.
Wow.
And that was definitely the moment of bliss, because in a journey of addiction and recovery, for me, I really had to ask myself, like, what are my moments of bliss? What makes me happy? What is my joy? And then I had to fight for that and pay the price. And so it really represented to me moving forward and paying the price and telling the truth and all those things, all those emotions wrapped into one, and finally being reunited with my wife. That was the best moment.
I like that. That's awesome. I do a conference called the Power of Purity Conference, and it's on my website. It's available online, and it's a series of 30 video sessions that a guy can watch at his own pace in complete anonymity. But one of the sessions I do is called Wife-Size Sex. And the point, and for those that kind of follow my podcast, they know that I teach, I believe very much to honor God with the expression of our sexual gift means to limit the expression of my sexual gift to my wife only. Mm-hmm. I can never, ever express my sexual gift apart from my wife. And that's the way God designed sex, and that's the way I honor God and honor my wife. Wife-size sex. So the idea of making my wife the goal of my sexuality. And for so many men, of course, we've struggled and struggled and struggled with that, as you did the first 5 years of your marriage. What so many guys do is what I call they double dip. They put one foot on their wife, metaphorically, and they say, okay, I'm going to get as much sex and as many orgasms as I can get from my wife, but my other foot I'm going to put over here in my secret exploits, pornography or cyber sex, internet chats or prostitutes or sexual massage, all the different things that guys do. So they're double dipping. They're getting orgasm from their wife, but they're also stealing orgasms. And so I believe that for us to honor God and to do sex God's way means that I put both feet into my marriage, both feet on my wife, and I'm going to limit myself now to wife-size sex. So I think it's kind of beautiful that at the end of your bike ride, it's like the jewel, the crowning prize at the end was your wife, and it's kind of a metaphor of you bringing yourself to your wife and her being the fulfillment of this journey that you had taken.
I love that. That's well said. I think that you're 100% right. When we talked about truths, that God is truth, the family is ordained of God, marriage is ordained of God, and complete fidelity within that marriage is crucial.
Right.
And it is. I think that was my moment of bliss. Ever since when I left Yorktown, Virginia, within 6 minutes of leaving, it got real.
Wow.
And I looked forward to that moment.
Dude, you had a long way to go. You were only 6 minutes in, and you had 56 days to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually planned on it taking me longer than 56 days. I thought it would take me more like 75, but I just put my head down and rode because I couldn't tolerate being away from my family any longer. But one thing that's really cool about my journey is that when I told my wife that I wanted to do the Coast to Coast and Chains, like I said, immediately the first words out of her mouth were, "You have to do it." But immediately following that were the words that you have to finish. She said, "You cannot come home. If you start this journey, you cannot come home early."
Wow. How's that for motivation?
I think it's just, she knew that we would want to quit. She knew there'd be days when I would want to quit. She knew that there'd be days when she wanted to quit, but she told me, "You cannot quit. Like, you have to finish."
That's awesome.
And
that tells me something about who your wife is, and I think that's cool.
Right.
So the fact is, for you to get back home, it's as if home was now 3,800 miles away, and for you to get back home, you had to cross the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, California, and that would bring you back home. So you knew, right, I've got to get across the United States of America.
Right. I knew it. I had to do it.
Well, I ask you, what was like the most awesome moment? It's when you met your wife and got to ride the last 2 miles with her. If you had to pick the stupidest moment, the hardest moment, the most difficult moment, the most terrible moment, what was the hardest part of the bike ride?
Getting myself in that position in the first place was the stupidest moment, because I have a 3-year-old boy, I have a 2-year-old girl, I have a wife that works, and I got myself in a position to be away from them.
Right. But would you, I don't imagine that you'd say that you regret it.
No.
You did it.
That's the thing is, I had to cross it. I had to do it. But I think the stupidest thing was, and maybe I don't know, it's just, I had to cross it, but I was there. And the way that I relate to it, or the way that I relate it to life, is how many of us wait to tell the truth until it's too late, and we lose our families, we lose our respect for ourselves, we lose our relationships that are most important to us because we wait too long.
That's right.
And that's why when I say the stupidest moment was me getting myself to the point where I'm away from my family, that's why I decided to tell the truth in the first place, was I wanted to pay the price now rather than pay the price later. The ultimate price later.
I like that. And I can affirm what you're saying. I'll tell you, I'm a pastor in Missouri, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I have the opportunity to work what I might say on the inside of a lot of people's lives, kind of like if you go to the mechanic and your car's not running right, he raises up the hood and looks underneath. I'm in a little bit of a unique position because of what I do as a pastor and a counselor. It's like people come to me and I kind of raise up the hood of their life and their soul, and we look in there to see what's going wrong, and I can affirm the fact that this issue of sex, misguided sexuality, sexual addiction, pornography, all these things have a destructive influence, and I can't tell you how many people I've seen whose lives have literally been destroyed, marriages have been lost, families are shattered, trust is broken. There is a very, very high price to pay for these things, so God forbid. Garrett, we're just about out of time, but I have at least two more things I want to ask you pretty quick. One is we touched on in part one of our interview last week, but you speak of there being when you rode your bike, you drug 7 chains behind you, and there's a reason that there were 7, because you kind of have this vignette, or you teach that there are 7 points or 7 chains that kind of bring captivity to men's souls with pornography. The chain of ignorance, the chain of isolation, the chain of secrecy, the chain of insecurities, the chain of poor decisions, the chain of disruption, and the chain of blame. So could you just comment on that for a moment, those 7 chains? Why did you drag those 7 chains?
Like you said, the 7, the one that I would want to touch on the most is probably the poor decision-making, the chains of poor decision-making. And when it comes to addiction, I can tell you that addiction isn't because people don't struggle with addictive behaviors because they're weak or because they can't hack it. The reason why is there's a scientific explanation as to why people struggle with it. And it, like we talked about last week, it goes back to the reward pathway. So that's one of the biggest chains to overcome, is rewiring your reward pathway to better decision making, because you have 20 years of this poor decision making, and you have to literally rewire your brain to improve decision making. Wow. And that was one of the biggest things for me, was deciding that I didn't want to look at pornography anymore. That was one of the biggest chains that I had to release.
Awesome. So it feels like it has something to do with getting possession of your own will back. I do a teaching. I talk about the importance of a man having possession of what I call his no muscle. Dude, you better be able to say no to something when a temptation comes or a certain opportunity. And if you can't say no, if you can't make that decision, then that's going to accrue to difficulty and probably be a big, big problem in your life. But if you could put words to it just pretty concisely, how would you say, how does a guy learn to do this? How do you learn to reprogram your brain? How do you learn to reprogram your heart and life from poor decisions to quality decisions?
I used a program probably very similar to the one that you provide at Power of Purity, where the individual can go through and watch the videos at their pace. I participate in a program very similar to that, but it's just a different one. And those programs really do aid you in the growth, aid you in realizing what you want and helping you improve that decision.
Awesome. And do you want to just go ahead and share what that program is? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. The website is fortifyprogram.org.
fortifyprogram.org. So if any guys are interested, they can check that out. And it's a series of teachings, information, videos that are designed to help a guy break the power of pornography from his life and soul.
Yeah. The great thing about the program is when an adult pays for the program, it pays for several youth to do the program for free.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And one last question I want to ask maybe as we wrap up here, Garrett. What would you say to a man who's been listening to this interview, who's involved with pornography, maybe like you were one day, like I was one day, who's struggling with this. His conscience informs him. He knows that he should not be doing this. He knows that it's not honoring to God. It's not honoring to his wife. Maybe he's even tried to stop, and he makes these promises. I'm never going to do it again. I'm going to stop. I'm going to get victory over this. But no matter how hard he tries, he can't stop. What would you say to a man who's struggling with this issue?
So I'd say a couple things. Number one is that you're going to have negative feelings at that point. You're going to have feelings like you're going to feel broken. You're going to feel messed up. You're going to feel sad. You're going to feel bad. And my first piece of advice would be to throw away those negative thoughts and realize that just because you look at this stuff doesn't make you a bad person. And secondly, the second thing I would tell them would be to realize that we talked about last week briefly that science has to catch up with truth before people jump on board.
Right.
And it's similar today where society and science is just scraping the surface of what pornography is, how it affects the mind. And so I look at it as anyone who struggles with pornography and struggles with this addiction, they're a victim. And because our society hasn't learned how to deal with it yet, right, how to cope with it, how to manage it. And so because you're a victim, know that you're a victim, that you didn't choose it. Like, it chose you. You were targeted by the porn industry. Wow. To be a number. And so my advice would be to know that you're a victim, but don't have a victim attitude. Like, we need you in the fight. We need you to press forward. We need you to tell the truth because there's other people that need you.
Awesome. I love that. And I love the idea that person who's suffered and struggled can become a victor. And I like what you said about we need you. And something I love about God is I believe God doesn't want to waste our pain, and that our story can become a very powerful tool in God's kingdom to help other people as we become willing to share with others our journey, what we've been through, what we've learned the hard way, and then that sheds a light for other people on their journey.
Absolutely.
Praise be to God. Well, Garrett, do you have a website you want to reference for anybody that might want to check it out?
For me, one of the websites that really helped me with my journey was fightthenewdrug.org. So that was one that really helped me. Your website is really good. Those are the only two websites that I'd like to give a plug to.
Well, good. I appreciate it. And I guess also what I meant is, do you personally have a website that you want to give so that guys can check it out?
Yeah, you can. If you want to check out more of my story, you can go to GarrettJohnsonLovesYou.com. And Johnson is spelled JONSSON.
Awesome. GarrettJohnsonLovesYou.com. I like that. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for being with me for these 2 episodes. It's been a blessing. I think you're an amazing guy, and you have an amazing story. And I think you're doing a lot to assault the problem of pornography in this day and age. And I think it's awesome that you did 30 marathons in 30 days in handcuffs. You rode your bike coast to coast in chains, and that's pretty awesome. Are you planning on doing another crazy event?
No. My crazy event now is raising 2 kids. That's probably the most challenging endurance event you're ever going to face.
There you go. I was wondering if you're going to swim across the ocean to Europe or something.
No, not for a while. My wife would kill me.
Okay, Garrett. Well, hey, God bless you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, God bless you. Thank you.
And guys, thank you so much for being with us for part 2 of the Garrett Johnson interview. I hope it's been a blessing and an inspiration, and I think Garrett is living proof that pornography does not have to hold the power in your life and soul that it's held for years and years and years. This is a man that struggled for over 20 years. It followed him into his marriage. For 5 years he had this secret. But through God's mercy and grace and power and God's work in Garrett's heart and life, He was able to come to the place where he dealt with some issues and did the work, and he got to a new and better place and a healthier place. And the chains of pornography have been broken off of his life and soul in the same way those chains were broken off of his bicycle as he rode across the country. So be encouraged, guys. There is victory. There is strength. Healing is possible. There is redemption. God intends something good for us. And just like God has worked powerfully in Garrett's heart and life, God's worked powerfully in my heart and life, God's going to work powerfully in your heart and life. So stay committed, stay on the journey, keep moving forward, and God has good things. So thanks for being with me in this episode of the Power of Purity podcast. I'll look forward to seeing you guys next week. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.